Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. In this episode, I sat down with Marc Kristal, who recently published the biography of British pop artist Pauline Boty. This episode, and the book's publication, is concurrent to an exhibition of Boty's works at Gazelli Art House here in London. Boty was born in South London, and in 1954, she received a scholarship to Wimbledon School of Art, and then continued her studies at the Royal College of Art in the late 50s. She worked across a variety of mediums that include painting, collage, and stained glass, and was known for celebrating her womanhood and sexuality in an unapologetic and open way. She died at the young age of 28 and has been a lesser-known member of the British pop art movement in comparison to her male counterparts. Pauline Boty's artwork is held in a few amazing collections, though, including the National Portrait Gallery and Tate Britain in London, as well as the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington. Listen on to hear me ask Marc about how he came to want to write about this artist and what went into producing a publication like this, covering the time spanning over Boty's life. Marc speaks about how he conducted his research and also how he persevered through obstacles and rejection, as he had worked on this publication for 9 years before finding a publisher. Thank you, Marc, for coming on the podcast and telling me all about Pauline Boty, her amazing life, and the wonderful process that you went through in producing this publication. Also, thank you to our sponsors at Synergy Associates, the art world tech gurus, for supporting this episode's production at their clubhouse on Pall Mall. You can find more about Synergy and their facilities in the show notes. Before I dive in, I wanted to let you lovely listeners know that All About Art is on Patreon. So if you want some behind-the-scenes content, maybe a bit of merch, the chance to get one-on-ones with me and my guests, or you're simply wanting to support this project, I would be absolutely thrilled if you decided to sign up. You can do so through the link in the show notes. I also wanted to say thank you to those who have already signed up. Your support means the world, and it makes the further production, improvement, and growth of the podcast possible. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful. And now, on to the interview. Welcome to the podcast, Marc.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted.
I am also very happy to be sitting down with you to discuss the fabulous book you just published on the British pop artist Pauline Boty.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you think it's a fabulous book. That's a good start.
Yeah, I do. Before I start asking you all about the process of writing a book and about Boty's life and work, I would love to give listeners a better idea of your background. How have you come to write a book about a British pop artist, and what brought you into the creative industries?
That's a very good question. I never started out, it was not my intention to be an art critic or a historian or a biographer. When I started out in life, I wanted to be a screenwriter and then a filmmaker. And I thought by now, I would have a bunch of Oscars on my mantelpiece and a big house in Bel Air. And I spent many years as a screenwriter. But what happens in the movie business, or at least in the movie business in California, is that at a certain point, if your pictures don't get made, you fall off the radar. They think, well, he was a promising unknown and he hasn't turned into an Oscar-winning genius. So he's still in the middle ground. We're overpaying him. Let's get another promising unknown. And then my career was effectively over. And I thought, well, I can sit around Hollywood for the rest of my life writing unproduced screenplays, or I can do something else. And I went back to New York and I got a degree in interior design from the Parsons School of Design, so that I could write about architecture and design. It was actually my intention to go to architecture school, not to practice architecture, but to be able to write about it with knowledge. And when I found out how much it cost to go to architecture school, I thought, well, I'll go to interior design school. And then when I found out how much that cost, I thought, well, I'll take night classes and, just get enough knowledge so that I don't ask stupid questions. And I started to write about architecture and design, first as a journalist and then as an editor. I also curated an exhibition and I worked on planning studies with architecture firms. And at a certain point, I started to ghostwrite books for architects and designers when they would get, a contract to do a monograph. And I did quite a number of those. And I started writing my own architecture and design books. And at a certain point, I was in London. This is about 10 years ago. And I went to an exhibition and I saw a painting of Pauline Boty's. And I'd never seen any of her work. It was almost exactly 10 years ago. And I'd never heard of her. And I was so taken with the picture, I thought, I'd like to know more about this artist. And that's sort of how it got going. When you're a freelance writer, you get used to just following your nose. It's, in my experience, not necessarily useful to wait for somebody to pay you to do something to start doing it.
Amen. That's what I do with the podcast.
There you go. If we waited for money, we wouldn't do anything.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And also when you're a screenwriter, you tend to originate your own ideas. You get an idea and you think, oh, I'm going to write that.
Yeah.
And I spent many years looking at paintings. I worked for the International Center of Photography in New York on documentaries about photographers. I've written short documentaries about painters, modernists, and contemporary artists. And I didn't feel frightened by the idea of doing something that I had no knowledge about. I didn't know anything about Pauline Boty. I didn't know anything about British pop or, the world of art and culture in Britain in the 1950s and the 1960s. I knew what everybody else knew. My knowledge started with A Hard Day's Night and it ended with Blow Up, with a little Twiggy tossed in for good measure. But none of that really mattered. What mattered was that I was interested in this story. And I just felt, why not pursue it?
Yeah. That actually is the perfect segue into my next question, because I want to talk about Pauline Boty and the story behind it. Because Boty, who was born in 1938 and died at the young age of 28, has been a lesser known member of the British pop art movement than her male counterparts like David Hockney, although she was a founding member of the movement. More recently, along with the publishing of your book, an exhibition is now taking place at Gazelli Art House in London with her works. Can you tell me what inspired you to write this book in the first place? And although I know that you touch on it in your book, how it came to be that her paintings didn't resurface until decades later?
I was in London in 2013, and I was on my way to have lunch with a friend. And I was passing Christie's in Mayfair.
Which is actually just right up the road from where we're recording this right now.
The book began just up the road from here.
Yeah.
And it started to rain. And I had an hour to kill. And I thought, well, there's this exhibition, a survey of British pop. I don't know anything about British pop except for the big names. I'll go in. And it was an enormous show. It was like, I think there were 150 artworks in it, ranging from the 1940s to the end of the 60s. And everybody was represented. David Hockney, Peter Blake, Alan Jones, R.B. Kitai, Guardo Palazzi, Jan Haworth, who am I leaving out? Richard Hamilton. And it was just an embarrassment of riches. And I was looking at all of this, and I saw this painting called, well, I didn't know what it was called. I was just drawn to it. And it was a painting of 3 rows in a collage style of famous glamorous men of different sorts. There was Elvis, there was Proust, there were the Beatles, there was Marcello Mastroianni and Federico Fellini. And in the middle of it, there was this very big, very luscious, unmistakably metaphoric rose. And I thought, well, this is really great. But the pleasure that you got from this sort of fan mood board in the middle was arrested by what was above it and what was below it. Above it, there was an American B-52 fighter jet. And below it, between images of Einstein and Lenin, was a frame from the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination. And I thought, that's very interesting. What an interesting juxtaposition to, on the one hand, express pleasure in the kind of pop, glamorous male that inhabits the world, and on the other hand, to take a withering look at what these men are capable of. So I looked at the title of the painting, and it was, It's a Man's World. And I thought, that's so interesting. A man's world is glamorous, exciting, and privileged on the one hand. And on the other hand, it's about dealing and experiencing death. So the combination of celebration and critique in the painting was what attracted me to it. And I felt very strongly the personality of the artist. I thought, I don't know who this person is, but I really get what this painting is about. So I looked at the name of the artist, which was Pauline Boty. And I'd never heard of Pauline Boty, but I saw that she died young. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I'm going to go back to, after lunch, I'm going to go back and see if I can find out a little bit about her. She had been in her day the it girl of swinging London. She was this great beauty. Yeah. She'd gone to Wimbledon School of Art, where she was nicknamed the Wimbledon Bardot for reasons that were just partly her beauty, but also her personality, which was extremely liberated. She went to the Royal College in its fervent years, when it was producing leading-edge art, architecture, design, you name it. Everything was coming out of the Royal College at that time. She enrolled as a stained glass student.
Yeah, I was reading that in the book, and I actually really loved seeing some of the examples of her work that she did in stained glass. I thought that those were also absolutely stunning.
Her work is excellent. Yeah. She studied stained glass at Wimbledon with a very forward-thinking tutor named Charles Carey. Mm-hmm. And Charles was trained in contemporary and modern art and encouraged his students not to do, traditional stained glass. He would give them these special projects. He'd say, here's a guy with a swimming pool, and he's got a lot of money, and he wants to put some exciting stained glass windows around the pool. Go design it. So he introduced Pauline to the idea of doing things differently. And he was very interested in collage, which became extremely important to her work, both collages that she made and a kind of collage style in her painting. So when she went to the stained glass department at the Royal College, it was easier for a woman to get in as a stained glass artist than it was as a painter. The painting school was very male. It was hard to break in as a woman. And I'm sure she was interested in stained glass, but it was also a Trojan horse to get into the Royal College. Yeah. Because when she was there, she did many things. As an artist, she began doing collages in a big way, and she also started painting. She joined the Anti-Ugly Action group.
I remember reading about that, yeah.
The whole thing is today,
it's very cool.
It is. It's so cool because these people in the stained glass department were horrified by the post-war building boom and what it was producing. And they thought, well, we're connected to architecture. We do stained glass. So why don't we do protests? But they didn't do conventional protests. They did street theater. They would carry cardboard coffins in front of ugly buildings. And on the coffin would be written, "Here lieth British architecture." And they would put it down in front of one or another horror and light candles and scatter rose petals on it. So,
I love the sass in that as well.
I know.
It was great.
It was outrageous. And that's the sort of material they did. When she got out of school, she became an actress. She worked on television. She worked on stage. She was an Alfie. In
really?
fact, yes. The only film, she was on TV and she was on the stage. The only film she was in was Alfie, which came out shortly after she died. And she has a small bit as the randy manageress of a dry cleaning establishment.
Ooh.
It's wonderful. She did all these things. She was a radio commentator on a BBC radio show called The Public Ear. Mm-hmm. And her commentaries were quite rough. She took on the establishment. She was very hard on men and how they treated women.
Wasn't there something in the book that I saw, and it was in particular, what was it? It was about Englishmen, and she was making this like comment.
Oh God, it was horrible. She laid waste.
I really enjoyed like how she went from like completely going into them and being like, well, they're this, that, and the other. But then she turned around and she was like, but they treat their women nicely. So I guess,
Well, it was funny because she said on the one hand, they treated their women like they were slaves. And
oh my God, yeah,
and
that's
on
right.
the other hand,
she
said, but in the end, I married an Englishman and he's a pretty good bloke. And she did. She married this guy 10 days after she'd met him.
Yeah.
And he was a very unusual man. His name was Clive Goodwin. And he was a television producer.
Yeah.
And he, like her, was very much a self-invented individual.
That's incredibly interesting to think about how exciting or sort of actually kind of crazy her life was at times. Marrying someone 10 days after you meet them. I mean, that's just something that I'm sure you hear of it, but I mean, that for me is just completely unfathomable. And I think that I would love to ask you about the process of actually researching Pauline Boty's life. So how did you go about it? Where did you even start getting all of this information? When you first saw that painting, at Christie's, and then you decided, I want to write about this. How did you then start that process of finding out more?
That's a very good question. I didn't really know where to begin. Mm-hmm. I did what everybody does. I went back to my rented room and got on the internet, looked her up. But I felt that this story could be best told through the voices of the people who knew her. There's a book called Edie that came out about 25 or 30 years ago in America. And it's an oral history of a woman called Edie Sedgwick, who was one of Andy Warhol's muses. And she was she wasn't all that interesting, but she was a kind of culture figure. And the book is a series of first-person monologues that have been edited together. All the people who knew her, her family, people from Warhol's factory. And I thought, that's a really good way to tell this story. I'll go out and I'll just interview everybody who ever met Pauline Boty and, her family members and the people she went to school with, and I'll cut it all together. Because I had worked on documentaries where I would sit down with transcripts and I would edit those transcripts together into a script. And to me, that's what I was going to be doing, except it was going to be a book-length script. So I started to ask people if I could talk to them. It was interesting because I didn't really know anything about British pop. So I had to do some reading to find out who these people were, what it was all about, why it was interesting. And I started doing that simultaneously with trying to get a hold of people and asking them if they would speak to me. They were remarkably forthcoming. My assumption was going to be that they were going to say, why should I talk to you? Who are you? You don't know anything about me. You don't know anything about the period. And now you're presuming to write about our Pauline. But it wasn't like that at all. Everybody was happy to talk to me. I spoke initially to Derek Bosher, the artist who was a classmate of hers. I spoke to Celia Birtwell, the fashion designer who was a flatmate of hers. I spoke to Peter Blake. And I had a lot of admiration for Peter Blake as an artist. And I was really surprised, but I was encouraged. And all these people would say, you should talk to so-and-so. Mm-hmm. After Pauline died, Clive had all of her paintings, or most of them, in the flat that they had lived in together on Cromwell Road. They were hung all over the flat. I assume that eventually, I know that he didn't quite know what to do with the work. He asked various people, what do you think I should do? What would be the best thing to do? And because he was a huge champion of his wife's work, he would presumably have eventually done an exhibition or endowed a museum or a gallery in a museum and put those paintings someplace. But when he died, he'd left a one-page will that he'd sort of scribbled out before he took off for LA. And it didn't really make provisions. It made very general provisions for his daughter and for the things that he had. But most of Pauline Boty's paintings, the paintings that we all love and cherish today, went to the attic of her parents' retirement bungalow in Caterham, and they stayed there. One of Boty's friends, Stephanie Duncan, who was a schoolmate of hers, told me that when she would visit, when Boty had gone back to living with them, Boty Goodwin being Pauline and Clive's daughter, they would go up into the attic, and she said we'd flip through these paintings like they were in a poster shop. And she was, would show me her mother's work. Eventually, Pauline's mother died, and her father was left living alone in the retirement bungalow. At a certain point, he wasn't well enough to live alone, and he was going to go to live on his son and daughter-in-law's farm in Kent.
So Pauline's brother.
Pauline's eldest brother,
yeah.
Yes. Pauline's eldest brother and his wife, Bridget. The book is dedicated to Bridget, and you're about to find out why. All of these paintings were in the attic. When Pauline's father was going to move down to the farm, they were going to sell the bungalow and get rid of the contents. And one of Pauline's brothers was, I guess, jealous of her success as a painter. And when Bridget, the farmer, came up with Pauline's brother to collect whatever it was that they were going to take back to the farm, the dishes and silverware, she said, "What's left?" And one of the twin brothers who was cleaning out the house said, "Well, there's Pauline's paintings, but I'm going to take those to the tip." For those of our listeners in America, the tip means the dump. And this was going to be the end of Pauline Boty as we know her today. He was going to throw all the paintings out. And Bridget said, "You can't throw out those paintings. Those paintings belong to Boty, and she's in California. You can't throw them out. They're hers. I'll take them." So she went back to the farm and she got a horse box, which is a little lorry that you use to cart cows around in. And she brought it up and she loaded all the paintings into the back of the horse box and drove them down to the farm and put them in a shower room. Thus was the entirety of Pauline Boty's mature herb saved by a farmer with a horse box.
Oh my God.
If it weren't for Bridget, there would be nothing. Yeah. I mean, there wouldn't be nothing. But most of what we know of today, between 15 and 18 major paintings were saved. And now there's this wonderful biography.
And now there's this wonderful book that I have in my hand.
10 years in the making.
Yeah, actually, that brings me to my next question, if I may. You had just mentioned, 10 years in the making. And because we're talking about the book, I just want to ask you about these 10 years, or 9 years, right? To be more exact.
Well, 9.
Yeah. I have here nearly 9 years. So yeah, 8.5. And you worked on this book for that long before actually finding a publisher. And you were rejected numerous times until 2022. So I wanted to ask, how did you find the motivation to keep going, researching, writing, putting all of this work in, not knowing that it would turn into the beautiful biography that I have here in my hands today, which I wish listeners could see, but maybe they have to just...
They can if they buy it.
They can if they buy it. They can.
What kept me going, Alexandra, was that I knew that someday you and I would be sitting in a studio doing a podcast.
One day I'll be on All About Art.
One day I'm going to be on All About Art, and I can't quit.
Okay, now the real answer, please.
Well, the real answer was I was very frustrated. I was used to it as a screenwriter. Rejection was not something that was foreign to me. I've written almost 40 screenplays, and only one of them was produced. It wasn't like I didn't have a thick skin, but I was very frustrated because it seemed to me so obvious that this was a good story. Mm-hmm. She was a superbly talented artist. Her work is excellent and very original and very much her own. She had led this incredibly interesting life. She was a feminist just ahead of that second wave of feminism, before it really had a name. She lived the way she wanted to live. She was a free spirit. She lived like a man, in a way. And many of her friends, especially her female friends, said that Pauline she swaggered around like a man did. She didn't see any reason why she couldn't do what she pleased. She said if men did what they pleased, why couldn't she?
Yeah, which back then was, it's not like it is today. I mean, even today we have issues and are still fighting for equality. But back, in the 50s and 60s, it was a completely different story to be like that and living your life like that and having that mindset.
Pauline was a one-off in many ways.
Yeah.
I know there are people who will disagree with that. And it's not like it was the triumph of the human spirit 100% of the time. She had a lot of doubts. She suffered from depressions. She, in her own estimation, misused her time working as an actress. She, when you follow your nose, sometimes your nose leads you in the wrong direction. But that in itself was a good story. And I felt I was just incredibly frustrated. I've been a writer now for 50 years. So between 40 and 48 years of my writing career, I just could not believe that nobody was interested in this story. But as I say, I was used to frustration, so it didn't stop me. There was a moment when I felt I'm not going to get there with this.
Really?
Partly it was because a lot of the people I wanted to talk to were very old. They either didn't want to talk to me or they didn't remember very well.
Yeah.
I couldn't really do an oral biography, and I had switched the style of the book from an oral biography to a hybrid that was partly conventional text and partly long blocks of first-person narrative. Mm-hmm. But I felt it wasn't going to happen. And I set it aside for a while. Not a terribly long time, but long enough. And at some point, I went back and read everything that I had. I read all the interviews. And I thought, this is too good a story to give up on. I really want to finish this. It's an important story, and I want to tell it.
Yeah.
But I felt that if Pauline Boty, her signature characteristic was that she would never be denied. If she couldn't do one thing, she did another thing. If she couldn't do it this way, she did it that way. This was somebody, everybody said that her sense of defiance, her unwillingness to be put down, was her most singular characteristic. And I thought, that's really what I admire the most about this person, apart from her talent. And if she couldn't be put down, why should I be put down? So I got lucky. Eventually I met somebody who was interested in publishing the book. He asked me to make some changes to it. I did. A man called Philip Cooper said, I'll publish this book, but I think you should do it entirely as a straight narrative. Why don't you give it a try and see if you can integrate what you've done into a more conventional book? So I thought, all right, I'll try it. What have I got to lose? And it seemed to work very well. So I said, okay. And he said, okay, bring me the manuscript in 6 months. And then 6 months later, I had my blood replaced and I turned in the book.
I think Philip Cooper, you said was his name.
Philip Cooper, yes.
Was he at the book launch this Thursday?
He was.
That the gentleman in the sweater?
He was the gentleman in the sweater. He was the fellow who introduced me.
Yes. And he made a comment. And I think that was also very interesting to consider, because he said that actually in the very beginning, he first turned down this book. And that he said, it was something that it's really difficult for a publisher to be able to fund, even the amount of research, extensive time and research that goes into something like this. I think this is something that is a general situation within the arts and cultural sector, is that the work that we put in is never really, truly given back to us monetarily, in a sense.
The work we put in never comes back to us as money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's true. I mean, for those of our listeners who are considering a career in the arts, you need to be prepared to do it on your own.
Yeah.
If I had gone to Philip or anybody 10 years ago and said, I want you to give me an advance to do a book about Pauline Boty, they would have gone after me with a butterfly net. And that was why everybody kept turning the book down. They said, Pauline who? It's like, I heard that so many times. There's no market for this. The fact is, nobody knew who Pauline Boty was. And occasionally I would get somebody who would say in a very sort of sniffy way, some people are justly forgotten. And it would make me so angry, my blood would boil. These people would sit behind their desks in New York or London and put down this fantastically talented artist, and then they'd go out and have lunch. I just felt that eventually I was going to get there.
Yeah.
I felt this story was going to, one way or another, get told. And that it was, everything that I was doing was worth doing. And I think that if you have a passion to tell a story, you should just tell that story. It's a very expensive proposition to spend 10 years working on something and not get paid. But in the end, you have something you can be proud of, and you can do something. I mean, this book is, as I said this the other night, this book is not about me. It's about a great artist and a singular personality who for too long was ignored and forgotten. And as an author, my function and my contribution is to help bring her back to life. And to the extent that I can do that, that's the extent to which I succeed.
Let's talk about the book's design. Is this something that you had, a lot of say in defining, like how this book was designed, the size, the weight, the paper, all of this? Because I would love to hear more about the choices of, as I said, the size, or, the fact that it's a hardcover, the glossy pages, the illustration.
Pauline Boty went to the Royal College of Art in the late 50s and early 60s, which was the breakout period for British graphic design. The most original and innovative design work in the world was being done in Britain at that time. If you're doing, quote unquote, an illustrated book, you want to privilege the images.
Mm-hmm.
You want the layouts to be evocative of what it is. So there's the tension between doing what would be a conventional trade book, because you certainly could have published this as a conventional trade book with plates in the middle and pictures scattered throughout.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what the design team did very effectively was that they came up with a book that doesn't seem to short either the text or the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Because partly it's because Pauline Boty did not produce an enormous amount of work. So if this were a book about Picasso, it would be considerably more difficult. But we were able to get in most of her major artworks, as well as a number of family photos, a certain number of graphics, a lot of visual material, so that you have a sense of not just the artist, but of her world. And at the same time, the book is not so big that you can't treat it like a conventional trade book. You could take this book on the tube and read it. And I think that's great. I didn't know what the book was going to be. I didn't know how big it was going to be. I didn't know how many pages they were going to allot to it. But I think the trim size, I think the weight, I think it all works very well. It's a book that you can carry around with you and read in a coffee shop. Or it's a book that you could stay home and look at the pictures with. So it works both ways. And it doesn't seem to be shorting one or the other.
These are the little details that a lot of people might not think about, but that in the grand scheme of things, when you look at it as a whole, like as an object and as something that will sit on your shelf, will be flicked through, will be read, will be held, will be carried, all of that really, it is important.
It is. I think it's a very satisfying object. Yes, it all works very well. And it's nice to have the same painting that I first saw on the back cover.
Is that the same painting?
Yeah,
on the back cover?
Yeah, it's A Man's World 1. That's the painting that I saw 10 years ago and started me on my journey.
Wow. I really, really love that. And I was really thrilled when I got it. As you say, it's this versatility that the design gives, as well as the text, to where I think as someone who has been in academia in the arts, I think that this could be used to write an essay, to research, of course, because it's a biography, but it's also something that you can read that has a narrative that's entertaining, something that you can sit down and you can really take your time to go through to learn more about her life and really go with you on that journey that you wrote about her and about her life. As my penultimate question, if I may ask, this book looks at art history and society also through a bit of a feminist lens by bringing the work of a woman's almost forgotten career to the fore. I would love to chat more about that. And I wanted to ask you if you felt like you were taking a more feminist approach to the publication.
You mean, did I have a feminist, quote unquote, feminist point of view from which I was writing?
Yeah. Or how do you feel about, I mean, I think inevitably it's going to be read from a perspective of looking at, feminism, especially because you also mentioned that she was living at a time that was right before the second wave feminism, and before that within society was actually quite prominent. She was quite forward thinking in that way, quite open in comparison to her contemporaries at the time. And so the fact that you are also a man and you're writing about a woman and you're writing about her being ahead of her time in a way, but I wanted to ask you about how you feel about that, or what your thoughts are on that.
That's a very good question. If I were an art historian or an academic, I might have said I need to take an approach, quote unquote. And my approach would perhaps be, I'm going to tell this story from a quote unquote feminist perspective. Being somebody who has spent many years writing fiction, to me, what I was trying to find in her life and her personality and in her work was the idea, and the personal through line for me is the idea of somebody who was not going to be told what to do, and especially not going to be told what to do by a male-dominated culture. She was going to live life on her own terms, even to the end, even the choice to postpone chemotherapy, to have her cancer treated, rather than having an abortion, because she decided that she wanted to have the baby, which seems in certain ways so retro, and yet it's actually a rather radical choice, in my own view. It took me a long time to come to that point of view, because to me it seemed almost like a capitulation to the idea of a man's world, saying, if I don't have a child, there'll be nothing left to remember me by, which seemed like an associate of Clive Goodwin's, Tariq Ali, the author and the activist, talked to Clive about it. And he asked the question of Clive, why didn't you compel Pauline to have an abortion? And he said, I couldn't make that choice for her. And she said to me, what if I have an abortion and I'm treated and then I die anyway? She said, this way at least there'll be something left of me in the world for you and others to remember me by, which is particularly poignant because there is nothing left in the world of them. The whole family is gone. Clive died when he was 45, and Boty died when she was 29. And to me that seemed, I think I would be not telling the truth if I didn't say that I feel that to a certain extent Pauline did feel that she hadn't accomplished enough in her life. But I also feel that you can read her story in two ways. You can read it as a woman who decided that at the very end, it's like in Brideshead Revisited, when Laurence Olivier crosses himself on his deathbed after being a lifelong atheist. You could say that this was somebody who backed away from her own point of view, who withdrew from the way she'd lived her life and made a choice to privilege the life of her unborn child over her own. A Victorian choice. Or you can say, this is somebody who died as she lived, doing what she wanted to do, believing in life and hope rather than the possibility or the inevitability of death. And doing something that on the one hand might seem to be very conventional, but in another way is an extremely radical and indeed feminist act. I mean, what is feminism if not the right to choose? And she made a choice. I think that from my own perspective, I was more interested in trying to find a way to bring her to the fore and let her personality come out. That's why I talked to so many people. I wanted to have everybody tell me what it was that they remembered so that I could put it all together into a prismatic portrait. I didn't want to put a philosophy or a point of view on it. It is, of course, a feminist story. It is a book about a woman who refused to play by the rules. A lot of her friends said, those days, women artists tended to be very nondescript because if they were flamboyant, they weren't taken as seriously. And they said Pauline was exactly the opposite. One of her stained glass classmates, Brian Newman, said Pauline was Technicolor. You know, when you're Technicolor in a black and white world, that's a statement. So I didn't feel that I needed to take a feminist perspective because it's all there on every page of the book. And rather than my beating you over the head with it, you can just read the story.
Yeah. It sounds to me like you, if I may say so myself, although you didn't feel that you had to take a particularly feminist stance in your writing, it sounds like you gave her story and that feminist lens through which her story can be told the space to be existent, the space to just be, as you said, because it's in the story already. I'm so glad that this book has been produced because, you know, we think about Linda Nochlin, why have there been no great women artists? And we think about the fact that, like, a lot of the time, way throughout history, yeah, it was about the fact that they didn't have the opportunities that the men were offered. But if we also look at, you know, decades ago in the 50s and the 60s, 70s, 80s, even all the way up until now, it's also about representation. It's about inclusion. And this book is that in terms of like making sure that her views as well as her practice, her life, all of that is included within this publication. I am going to ask my final question. This is a fun one that I like to ask all of my guests here on the All About Art podcast. Although I feel that this time it may almost be a rhetorical question. I feel like I shouldn't even be asking this, but I do it with everyone, so I have to. If you could pick one artist from art history to have dinner with, who would it be and why?
It would be David Hockney.
No, that's not what you're supposed to say, really?
No, I'm kidding. No, obviously, if I could pick one artist from art history to have dinner with, it would be Pauline Boty. I mean, I can't imagine a better evening.
Marc, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for telling me more about your writing process, about the ups and downs of learning more about Pauline, about putting this in a book. And yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Alexandra. I really appreciate it. I very much enjoyed this. And it's especially meaningful to me because I'm not really of the art world to be invited onto a show that is all about art.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.